Welcome to the fourth episode of the Punch Plan Podcast. In this podcast, we're going to be going over how Jake Paul knocked out Tyron Woodley in complete devastating fashion. So, as we know, Jake Paul was able to pretty much just put Tyron Woodley's lights out with a brutal right hand, which was literally a one-punch KO. It came out of absolutely nowhere. No one really expected it because it was close fight at the time. So no one really expected Jake Paul to just come in with a huge overhand right and put Woodley down. If anything, it was more likely that Woodley would be doing that, especially considering the first fight and how he was able to rock Jake on the ropes. So, geez, what an outcome.
Yeah, like that gotta be one of the most devastating KOs I've seen,
Yeah.
especially like in a long time. That was incredible. Like just with one shot on a guy like Woodley, who has a real amazing chin. And on the last fight, he was able to eat a lot of Jake's punches, and now with this time, just his full leverage, full hip rotation, full power into that huge shot and just slam Woodley, and Woodley just
Yeah.
went out.
And to do it
That
against
was
such
bad.
a veteran, such a combat sports legend in MMA, of course, becoming a five-time UFC world champion, a future Hall of Famer pretty much, and to knock him out like that so brutally with just a one-shot KO, which he kind of set up because Woodley was coming in to parry the jab, but Jake kind of feinted it and then came in with a huge overhand right, which just put Woodley's lights out. And it was definitely a good setup from Jake. He was always trying to reset throughout the fight. You notice he was clinching a lot. Both of them were kind of clinching, and they were kind of making a dirty fight and pretty much a boring fight. We're watching it, and nothing's really
Yeah.
happening. No one's really landing significant shots. Nothing's really happening. Jake's not really getting behind his jab as pretty much everyone thought he would, and he wasn't really boxing as much. But he went for that one shot KO, which really put a statement out there to pretty much just put him on the map there in boxing and get all the hype behind him yet again from another crazy knockout. Like, jeez.
I mean, like, just wow, man. Like, just no one saw that coming. Like that fight was pretty stale. There wasn't much going on. They were clinching very frequently, and just boom, just like that. And that's why combat sports, man, anything can happen.
Yeah.
And like we saw, man, no one expected Woodley to, especially get knocked out like that. Like maybe like a knockdown during the fight, but a
Yeah,
KO
and he went
like
limp.
that,
Like his
and
soul,
Woodley
like it
was
looked like his
out.
soul left his body. The way that he
It
fell
did.
and like the way that he went out, it was crazy. And it kind of looked like an eraser. Like people say how Deontay Wilder, he's not a good boxer. Obviously, it's wild for me to compare him to Deontay Wilder. That's not really what I'm saying, but in the essence that Deontay Wilder isn't the greatest boxer, and he usually loses rounds, but then he comes in with one shot out of nowhere and can put lights out on anybody. Especially that fight with Luis Ortiz where he was down pretty much I think 7 rounds, and then just came out with one overhand right, put Luis Ortiz out in just one shot, which is very similar to what Jake did here. He wasn't he probably wasn't losing the fight. I think I had it 3-2. So Jake was up 1 round on my scorecard, but a lot of people had it differently. Some people had it for Woodley, some people had it for Jake. Different scorecards out there. But Jake just covered all that controversy and just put it out there, put a statement out, just erased all those previous 5 rounds by just putting Woodley out like a light. And that was such a statement, such a huge win for Jake. And that is really going to propel his career from here on out even more than it already has been. The trajectory that he's going on in boxing is pretty crazy right now.
Yeah, and for me also, I had Woodley up on the scorecards, and it was interesting how it played out because I kind of had Jake Paul coming in here trying to box more and trying to just play to his style more and kind of use his height and his size to
Yeah.
his advantage. And I wasn't really expecting how it went where they were kind of clinching, and I guess that was part of Jake's plan. Like how you mentioned in the post-fight interview, how he was setting up that shot that whole fight, and then I guess that's what he was going for, and then he managed by kind of, in a way, it was a deceptive overhand where it kind of looked like he was going to the body maybe, and then that might have been what Tyron was looking at, and then he came up top and just nailed Woodley with a huge shot, and that's a really impressive thing to have in his arsenal. Just to know that Jake Paul could knock out anyone at his weight class is it's huge for him, and now it's definitely he's gonna be a force to be reckoned with, and if he's able to build his skills a bit more and kind of improve on some of the more technical aspects, even though he looked a lot more sharper than the last fight, then he could really start to improve and become a much better boxer overall.
And another big thing that people are missing in this fight is that he was able to carry that power within those 6 rounds, within that adversity that he was facing. Obviously, he had a huge cut on his forehead, so that opened up, and he had to deal with that. He had to deal with eye with blood in his eyes and near his nose and his mouth, and that's not usually something that someone that early in a career has to deal with, especially that big of a cut. And Jake handled it well. He handled it like a professional boxer would. So credit to
Yeah,
him.
it's a
Credit to
deep
him
cut.
for still having that pace and that cardio to be able to land a flush knockout one punch shot all the way in the later rounds in the sixth round. So I mean credit to him because that it was a great shot and it was later in the fight. A lot of people thought if Jake was gonna win, it would be by early when he still has his cardio, but he had his cardio throughout the rounds. Definitely which was definitely impressive because obviously the first fight he didn't really have the best cardio because he was using it a lot, especially his cardio management this fight. He wasn't really on the back foot as much. He wasn't running around the ring as much. He was kind of staying toe to toe with Woodley, which I mean is kind of dangerous, but he managed to clinch up and just do the right stuff to get that one punch shot. So we can't really question his performance when he had that devastating blow at the end.
Yeah, and after the fight, so many people on social media again saying that the fight was rigged
Yeah,
and Woodley took the dive and whatnot. And
come on,
I
man.
just I don't
Stop.
understand it at this point. I don't get it because that shot, like you can see it any angle you like. That was the most clean shot you'll find, right on his face. And like someone was even saying how when he adjusted his hand, because he did a little weird like hand twitch right before he threw the punch, that was like the cue
Such a
for when
stretch.
Woodley was
Such a
gonna take
stretch.
his
I,
dive.
I, I
Not even
actually
a
I actually
stretch, just illusion.
Yeah, I actually watched the fight back, and that's just a natural habit of his. He was literally just even in the first round he was twitching. He was just moving his hands. He just moves his wrists. Just stay comfortable. It really just doesn't make sense. First of all, like that's highly illegal. It's why would Tyron Woodley ruin his legacy like that? That first fight he got a decision win, or he got a decision loss obviously, and it wasn't embarrassing for him because I mean obviously he lost to a YouTuber, so that part's embarrassing, but it's not like he got knocked out. It's not like he got memed. In this fight, he's become a meme. This is going to be what people remember of his legacy, especially because recency bias. People are just going to remember the later parts of his career, how he lost 4 times in the UFC, lost twice to Jake Paul, is 0-6 in his last, and it's super unfortunate to see him go out like that. And I just don't see why Woodley would take that. I just don't see why Woodley would risk his whole reputation just for some money. It just doesn't make any sense.
Like this is also Showtime. Like they're one of the biggest brands in boxing, and like for them to rig a fight, it doesn't make any sense. They would be out of business, and it's just super illegal. And you could just see like this was a fight. They were going after it, and there was nothing rigged about it. Like
Yeah. How can you call it rigged when Jake Paul had an entire cut on his forehead and it was gushing blood and it was coming and Woodley was coming in with huge shots
yeah,
and
they were both
and
going for it
had his
fully.
moments and there were tons of they were both going for it and they were both obviously landing real shots. You can't watch that replay and say that they weren't trying to hurt each other.
Especially at the
It was
end.
definitely not rigged. And people who say that are mostly going to be people who are just bandwagoning and are sheep pretty much because they're just following what everyone says and it just makes no sense if you look at it logically. I don't care if you like Jake Paul, you hate him, you don't care about him, whatever the situation is. It really makes no sense for him to be rigging fights. I mean, they're throwing real shots, they're throwing hard shots, and yeah,
Yeah, well, ultimately, at this point, it's pretty much just because they don't want to see, or they want to see Jake lose, and because they dislike him heavily. But like, come on, at this point, like, even if you like the guy or hate the guy or whatever, you have to at least somewhat like respect what he's doing, and especially like with him having to late fight replace. Like, if let's say if it was rigged, why would Tommy just back out for Woodley instead as well? Like, it
yeah,
just I don't understand it. Like the whole point in general, and like why would Jake Paul be going out his way to rig these fights when they're fully going at it? Even in the last fight, Jake got hurt massively, and he was wobbled really hard. And it just they're going
yeah. If he
after
was if
it.
he
They're
was if he
fully
was
going.
if he was rigging that, then why would why would Woodley land a huge overhand right, and why wouldn't Woodley take a dive in that first fight? If it was rigged, why would he just get a decision win, a split decision? That's not how you build up a fighter's career. So it just honestly just doesn't make sense for it to be. for Jake Paul's fights to be rigged.
And especially like, come on, the most telling thing, like you can't fake a knockout like that
Oh,
happened.
for sure.
Tyron was he was gone. Like, how can you possibly rig? Like, you can't rig something like that. Like that
The
looks
and and,
as
and
real as it comes.
and he literally like his face planted and dived right in head first into the canvas. You're not gonna find a fake fall like that where he goes face first, where his head collides with the canvas and he's literally out on his feet and he goes limp. You're not gonna find
Yeah,
a fake shot like that. And the fact that people are gonna be calling that rigged it's just weird.
it's beyond me. Yeah, like it gets to a point where like at this point he's had 5 fights, and it's like, come on, like you've seen the competition go up, and moments for his opposition as well for him. Like, come on, there's gotta be a point where you, at least keep the hating side apart from when you're calling it rigged, because these guys are going out there and like putting their lives on the
And
line.
I mean, credit to Jake for taking the fight. Credit for Tyron Woodley for taking the fight on short notice because he didn't have to either. He could have waited and say, "No, I want a full training camp. I wanna actually go at it with you again if you wanna do
Hmm.
this for real." So
Yeah, exactly. And also on these huge events that Jake Paul has been putting on, like in a year, so many. He's one of the biggest stars in the sport now. He is,
yeah, and,
honestly.
and, and honestly, he came off 2020 with a huge viral highlight reel knockout against Nate Robinson, which obviously he's a basketball player, so it didn't really mean much. But the fact that he has knockout power like that was proven in that fight. Of course, we saw that against Tyron Woodley. So, yeah, I mean that was a huge knockout against Nate Robinson that really brought his momentum into 2021, and he just didn't stop. He went straight into a fight with Ben Askren, knocked him out in the first round. 3 months later, he's in the ring again with Tyron Woodley, and he gets the decision win. And then another 3 months later, he's in the ring with Tyron Woodley again and puts on that performance. So, I mean,
Yeah.
you got to give him credit for what he's doing in the sport right now, how he's been promoting himself, how he's came into the year with the momentum of the Nate Robinson fight, calling out guys like Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz, Ben Askren, obviously Michael Bisping, people like that. Dana White, of course. So, I mean, he's really promoting himself. He's marketing himself well, and he's done a great job this year of promoting himself and just
Yeah.
getting his name out there. Whether you love him or hate him, you're paying attention to Jake Paul.
And then the main thing that's pretty much been allowing him to like just sustain the hype super consistently is the fact that he's always making buzz. He's always making news. He's always calling out these different guys like Jorge Masvidal, Conor McGregor, even other boxers, and he's just creating buzz for everything. And that's why his pay-per-views are big, is because there's so much hype surrounded with it, with the social media aspect of it, and also from his highlight reel knockouts, and especially with this Tyron Woodley knockout that just he just
Yeah,
got. It's going to
and
be
and the
even bigger
momentum
his next fight, whether that be against Tommy or Jorge Masvidal or whoever. It'll be huge.
Yeah, and the momentum he's building. I mean, he's and another thing is he's being very active. He's been more active this year than a lot of actual real pro boxers. So you got to give him credit for putting on a show and getting out there training and going through tons of training camps throughout the year and actually working hard. He's not taking the sport as a joke, and you got to give him credit whether you love him or love to hate him.
Yeah.
He's definitely one of the biggest stars in boxing right now, and we're going to see if he's going to be able to continue this momentum onto 2022. Of course, just came off a huge win over Tyron Woodley, so
And
super exciting, super bright future to look forward to there. And yeah, he's making so much noise in not even just the boxing world, but the MMA world. He's making people in the MMA world care for him. He's making people from the UFC, Dana White, those people are talking about him now because he's calling out these guys like Conor McGregor. Maybe maybe Conor McGregor's not responding and he hasn't responded ever to
yeah,
any of
but
Jake
still,
Paul's
it's
call
still
outs,
hype
but
in social
it's
media.
still, yeah, it's still people caring and it's still people paying attention. And yeah, it's just he's doing great.
Yeah, and the most interesting thing about Jake is he has the capability of creating buzz, whether it's a in-ring highlight or something, or out of ring mischief that he pulls off. Like when he took Floyd Mayweather's hat, that blew up. It was huge, and that really propelled his brother Logan Paul's fight with Floyd Mayweather really big. And in a way, on that press conference, they stole the show, which is how big of a moment it was. And Jake, just being the great promoter and marketer he is, even was just upping that up by making that his catchphrase for so long. And he made merch
Yeah, he
with
sold
"Gotcha" hat
hats.
on
He
it.
literally
Like,
sold hats.
it just shows like
Amount of money he probably made off those too, with all the
yeah,
momentum of the gotcha
huge.
hat movement, and like he's a genius marketer, and people are gonna discredit him just because people don't like what he stands for, or what he's doing in the sport. But he's definitely one of the biggest boxers right now, and he's making a huge buzz, making people care about him. So yeah, that he's definitely one of the biggest boxers in 2021, which is crazy to say. I
Yeah.
mean, who would have expected this a couple of years ago? Jake Paul, the guy who's making some cringe YouTube vlogs, is now become one of the biggest prize fighters in the combat sports world.
And he has
Like,
so much more potential because with each fight, it keeps getting bigger and bigger. Just like you
yeah,
can just see from
especially with
before.
all his knockouts.
Yeah, like from the Give Anyson Give fight, he knocked them out. It went huge. Then he moved on and then moved on and then moved on until where we are now to Tyron Woodley, where he knocks him out cold, something no one expected. And this could be. We know how viral the Nate Robinson knockout was. This is probably will be even more viral than that
Yeah, because
knockout,
it's a real
which is
fighter,
huge. Yeah, exactly. It's
and it's someone
just
who's a
the
veteran.
difference in
It's not it's not
skill.
it's
This is
not it's not
Tyron
a
Woodley.
joke. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
like
this is a
Tyron Woodley.
five-time UFC champion compared to a retired NBA player. So the size of the different events are completely different. And it also goes to contribute towards Jake's skill improving and improving with each fight as well. Since especially he's a young athletic fighter. So we're getting to properly now see that with each fight, he's really starting to improve. And with that, all the hype that he's gaining and all the pay-per-views, and it's just gonna lead to bigger and to bigger. And we'll see if it's ever gonna if it's gonna be stopped anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason all these legends of the sport are getting behind these guys. Mike Tyson, Vander Holyfield, even Canelo's has, obviously had a back and forth with Jake, but he doesn't really mind it because they're bringing new eyes to the sport. At the end of the day, Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, all of these guys have come out and said that they they're not doing bad for the sport because they're bringing new eyes, and they're doing well for the sport, and doing well with what they can. So I mean, Jake Paul becoming one of the biggest fighters of 2021, you got to admit it because he put on some big shows and he did well.
Yeah,
So,
big
I mean,
stuff.
yeah, that was crazy, but another one of those guys that he has been riling up and he has been calling out over the past couple of months is Jorge Masvidal. Obviously, we know how they were kind of friends, I guess, but it was more so of like trolling,
Yeah, cause
where they
Ben
were trolling
Askren.
Ben Askren, leading up to that fight, and they were kind of like teaming up. They were like FaceTiming each other, and they had like a little like gym session together.
Yeah, and then
But
it went
now
sour with
the
the
beef
Woodley.
the beef is yeah the beef is really settling in after Jorge Masvidal's friend, obviously Tyron Woodley, went up against Jake Paul, and he said Tyron Woodley's gonna knock this guy out, and Jake Paul kind of took that as like a stab behind the back because obviously during the Ben Askren fight they were cool, and now suddenly he's rooting against him. So I mean, you can take that how you will. But at the end of the day, Masvidal's been friends with Woodley for much longer than he has with Jake. So yeah, obviously this fight is gonna be super hard to make considering we'd need the approval of Dana White.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
don't.
it's it's it's
It's
gonna be,
hard.
yeah, and also if Jake Paul was to fight a UFC fighter, I think Diaz is probably the most likely option, especially considering
Yeah,
his
I agree.
his contract was just extended with the UFC, and that would just be such a mega fight, and also less of a risk for
Yeah,
Jake.
definitely.
Why
That
would you
makes
get in
sense.
there with
Yeah.
why would you get in there with someone who's so much more of a risk when you can take someone who's less of a risk and probably similar draw?
Yeah.
So
Like I feel because the clash of styles is so interesting. Like I feel like the way it's promoted and builds up, like either one between Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz or Jake Paul versus Jorge Masvidal could be bigger. Like you see Jake Paul, and then of course the huge following and fan base that Nate Diaz has, and it would be a sick build up, and of course the press conferences would be super cool. But then you also have Jorge Masvidal, who's blown up recent years in popularity and has gained so much hype behind him, and that as well would be such a huge fight, and it would be. I really wonder how it would play out. Like even leading up, I feel like Torre would take the win there, but
Yeah,
it
for
would be
sure.
an interesting fight to see, and if Jake would be able to compete.
Yeah, I think I mean Masvidal's such a veteran striker, and he's been in the game so long, and he's not like he's not past his prime like a lot of these guys that Jake Paul's been fighting. Obviously, Ben Askren came off a hip surgery. Tyron Woodley coming off 4 losses in a row. So Masvidal's like the only guy he would fight that's really in his prime. If he were to fight one of these guys in the UFC that are in their prime, Masvidal is probably the scariest option. But I think Masvidal would definitely take that, especially considering Jake Paul struggled in that first fight against Tyron Woodley, and Tyron Woodley's not really a striker. He's obviously a wrestler, but has huge power, and obviously has been striking for a long time, and has been boxing training for a long time. But it's not solely boxing. He's doing mixed martial arts, so there's tons of different things, tons of different arts there. So it's not strictly boxing for Tyron Woodley, and that's what we saw. And we saw Jake Paul able to stop Woodley in that rematch, but I don't think he's gonna be able to beat Masvidal unless he just finds a haymaker out of nowhere, just like he did against Woodley. I definitely way less of a chance against Masvidal, but I mean Usman was able to do it, so who really knows? It's
Yeah.
possible. It's possible that Jake Paul lands a nice shot on Masvidal, but I just don't see it happening. I think Masvidal is too good. He's in his prime. He's in the game long enough, and he has definitely what it takes to conquer Jake Paul. So I think Masvidal would take that. And especially with train in a whole boxing camp where he only gets to focus on boxing. Like so many years this guy's been and he's a tough guy in his prime. I don't think Jake Paul would be able to do that unless he's really able to build his skill set over the next couple of years. I mean, we keep seeing him improve every single fight. So if he can really get to a level in boxing where he's able to at least compete against some you know higher level guys than he has. I mean, so far we've seen Jake Paul against Tyron Woodley, which it seemed like Tyron Woodley was really at the same level as Jake in terms of his boxing skill. But I mean,
Yeah, well, to be fair, Jorge Masvidal, he's pretty old to be honest. Like Tyron Woodley's like only 3 years older, and Masvidal's 37, but he's definitely still kind of around his peak for sure. Even though he's coming off a huge loss to Kamaru Usman, huge knockout. But I just see Jorge Masvidal being a lot more dangerous than Woodley would be. I don't know how they would compare power wise. I'd probably give that to Woodley as for like a one shot power. But Masvidal is such a killer, man. He's got so many deadly strikes, and especially if it's just boxing, then it could be really bad for Jake. But I guess you never know. But it would be a really tough fight for Jake to try to compete in.
yeah, I mean, in the future, there's potential for that being a competitive fight, especially if Jake Paul continues to improve and maybe Masvidal has a decline. I mean, that's probably the only real way that Jake Paul would have a good shot of winning that fight. But I don't really think it's gonna happen just because obviously he's under contract with UFC, and I don't think he is the best option. Obviously, he made a Twitter video calling out Jake, saying he wants to do MMA. That will never happen. It's not even a question.
Yeah.
Jake Paul would never step in the octagon with Masvidal. I don't even think he'd step in the octagon in general. So, I mean, yeah, that's out of the realm of possibility. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But I mean, a boxing match between them would definitely be super entertaining. It would be so exciting. But I think there's better options out there than Masvidal. I'm gonna be real.
I feel like a fight with Masvidal would be good. However, it's also as well with such a big risk, and also it's like there are some names there that's like compete with him. Even though Masvidal, I guess we'll see after this big KO where he still stands in star power wise, but he's up there for sure. And I guess depending on what Jake is able to get for his next fight, of course, it's gonna be extremely hard to try to get any of these guys now out of their contract with the UFC, or not out, but I guess kind of let Dana out of their contract to fight him since obviously we know the beef with Dana and Jake, but I guess especially with what's you never know, you just never know, but that would be a good fight. However, there's of course still other good fights for Jake, such as maybe we'll see that Tommy fight maybe Nate Diaz. Who
Yeah.
knows? There's a
Hmm.
ton of possibility.
Yeah. But yeah, Masvidal is quite a bit smaller than Jake, especially considering he used to fight at 155.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think
there's that
Masvidal walks
size.
around like 190, but yeah, he's a big guy. But, he's a big guy, but yeah, Jake's
But
bigger.
he's not the biggest welterweight.
Yeah.
He's no Usman, that's for sure.
Well, Usman's like
Yeah,
Usman's
he's the
huge.
biggest you could find.
Yeah.
Um, but on that note of other potential fights for Jake, I mean, obviously Tommy Fury was the fight that was supposed to happen. We weren't supposed to get Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley too. We were supposed to get Jake Paul versus Tommy Fury, and that fight would have been super interesting to see how that would have turned out. But it's gonna be interesting to see that now that we've seen Jake load Tyron Woodley up with that huge right hand. It's gonna be interesting to see if Tommy Fury will have to suffer the same fate as Tyron Woodley just did. What do you think?
Yeah, at this point, I don't know if this fight's ever gonna happen, but
I think
if
it
it
will.
did, I think it would be even more hype than it was when it was first
Yeah,
announced
yeah,
for
for
sure,
sure.
especially with the hype of the knockout. But gee, I don't know. I
I
don't know
think
what
Jake's
Tommy
momentum
would.
now.
Yeah, I don't see how Tommy can hurt Jake. I don't know. Well, it's hard to say where his skills are at, especially since who he's fought. He hasn't fought the best of guys,
Yeah,
and it's hard to match his skills. But from what we've seen, I don't know. I don't see really how Tommy can hurt Jake or win rounds against Jake.
yeah. Especially considering Woodley landed in some nice shots and wasn't really able to hurt Jake besides that time in the first fight where obviously he was stumbling on the ropes and was rocked. But Jake is tough, and we saw him endure cuts, and we saw him face a lot of adversity already in these last two fights. So and we've never seen anything from Tommy, but 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 Jake didn't look specifically like an amazing boxer in that Woodley fight. He was probably he was losing a couple of rounds. He wasn't doing the best. He wasn't his best performance. He could have been down. He could have been up. Depends who you're asking, but. I mean, yeah, Jake did what he had to do. Obviously, finished Woodley with a devastating shot. So we haven't seen Tommy Fury do the same. His last opponent was nowhere near the level of Tyron Woodley. Obviously, he's a Bellator wrestler and wasn't really a notable guy. Definitely didn't have anywhere near the power
Yeah, definitely
of
not.
Tyron Woodley. And he was tiny. He was like 5'6", 160 pounds. And Tommy Fury couldn't get him out of there in 4 rounds. Couldn't even knock him down or really laid on him. So that was a really disappointing performance. And I'm pretty sure that the last guy he fought just
Yeah,
lost on that
or
Jake
yeah,
Paul card.
the guy who Tommy Fury just fought lost on the Jake Paul fight.
In my
Oh
opinion,
my
that
god.
even makes Tommy Fury's win look
Yeah,
even worse now.
he
Like,
lost to like one of Nate Diaz's teammates.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
I
not
mean,
looking good for Tommy, man.
it's not a good look there for
I
Tommy.
doubt even Jake gives him another opportunity at this point.
I think he will. I think he
Yeah,
will. Because
maybe.
that's really like the only real option for Jake. Because who's he gonna fight? A guy in the UFC?
True.
Dana's not gonna let that happen.
Yeah, true.
You know,
I guess
he
if there's
doesn't really
nowhere to
have many
go.
options besides really Tommy. I could see that happening maybe in the summer, late next year, obviously, because Tommy's coming off that injury, and Jake obviously he said he wants to take a break. He says this every fight, but
Yeah,
who knows? Maybe he's gonna maybe he's actually gonna do it this time.
yeah, who knows?
But yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see if that fight will happen. I think Tommy Fury versus Jake Paul is next because it just makes the most sense. I don't Jake's not gonna fight someone in the UFC. Obviously, he's not gonna go backwards and fight an athlete that's not a fighter. I don't think. So yeah, I think Tommy Fury is the most logical next step, especially considering the Fury name and how much bigger that will be now that Jake Paul has that knockout and how the storyline of how Tommy Fury pulled out and his injury. So, yeah, I mean, we're gonna see if Jake can knock Tommy Fury's spark out like Tommy's been wanting, or Tommy's been saying that he's gonna do to Jake. I mean, considering Jake Paul's, he's proving time and time again that he has that knockout power. Ben Askren, Nate Robinson, Tyron Woodley, obviously, all these guys were hitting the canvas at least once in their fights. So, yeah, I mean, Jake has knockout power. Does Tommy?
I
We
guess
don't
we'll
really
see.
know. It's kind of dodgy. His opponents haven't been the greatest, so
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
really
we
hard to
haven't really
say.
seen him knock
And
anyone's spark out, so I don't see
yeah,
him knocking Jake especially.
besides like a 10 and 100 guy, I
Yeah,
think I
but
think he was
that
able
you
to
can't
I think he
even.
was able to get that plumber out of there.
Yeah, but you can't even compare it or like at all. it's really a can to like a MMA champ.
I think on paper, Tommy Fury is still a step up for Jake, just because of him
Yeah, I
being
would
7
say
and
so,
0,
especially the
and Jake
team he
being
has
5 and
around
0.
him with
Yeah, and now
Twisted Fury.
Woodley's 0 and 2,
Yeah,
technically
oh,
in boxing.
and especially
But
when I
I
saw it,
mean,
it's so
obviously,
funny.
but it's hard to say that it's hard to see Tommy Fury being a harder fight than Tyron Woodley, especially considering the experience of Tyron, how much he's done,
Yeah,
how much he's been
Tyron
in,
definitely poses more of a
and
threat than Tommy.
if Jake can knock Woodley out of there and get him out of there, and he looked sharper in that fight. To be fair to him, he had better technique. His footwork was definitely smoother, and I don't know. He just looked more like a solid boxer. His defense was sharp. Obviously, he's not perfect.
Yeah, he still
He's
has
still
much more
at an
room
amateur
to
level,
improve, but
and
he looks
a
better.
lot of room to grow. But compared to that last fight, he wasn't as sloppy. He didn't look like he had as much gaps. But Woodley was still had a better game plan considering that he was at least throwing more. But still, it was a pretty boring
Yeah,
fight. Considering
like
they were just clinching the
I
entire time.
I'd say well definitely
There's a lot of clinch
Woodley's
work.
a much more of a threat than Tommy,
Yeah,
definitely.
especially
Because
power
we don't even
wise.
know if Tommy has any power. He says he's gonna knock everyone out, but we haven't seen him knock really anything out.
I don't think he's only knocked
Other,
anything out besides his rib cage, but
yeah, yeah.
Tommy fumbles, but we're gonna see if he can bounce back, if he can come into this Jake Paul match, maybe prove us wrong. I mean, I definitely think that Tyron Woodley is more of a threat than Tommy would be, but maybe I'm wrong.
I don't see
Maybe
Jake
Tommy
being
would
scared of Tommy's
Maybe Tommy
power.
would outbox Jake to oblivion. Who knows? I mean,
Yeah,
Tommy Fury has that experience of being a boxer growing up, but at the same time, he doesn't have that experience being under the lights. He doesn't have that experience of being hurt. He doesn't have that experience of actually going through adversity or going through anything in fights.
at least we all know that they both have experience being on TV shows, so I guess we'll see how that
There we
matches up
go.
for them.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, I mean, then there's Jake Paul, who's been saying he has plans of becoming a world champion in boxing.
yeah, it's quite the goal
It's quite
for
the
Jake
task.
Paul.
Quite the task. Yeah.
Like, I mean, with how many belts there are in boxing, and hey,
Yeah.
Jake even made one himself. So I wouldn't be
Yeah,
surprised if that got added to the
he's
official
already
list of boxing
most
titles.
valuable boxer belt. I mean,
Yeah,
honestly, in boxing, like it's not as hard as people are gonna think it is because there are world champions who have fought nobodies in boxing
yeah, it's
because the all these sanctioning bodies and all these organizations and all these promoters, all these fights that don't happen, and then you have tons of different champions and tons of different weight classes with tons of different belts, and you're like, okay, what really is a world champion in boxing anymore? Are even any champions? Where's a champion?
yeah,
Because all these guys just have belts handed to them for
yeah.
nothing.
To put it
And I
blunt,
mean,
it's a bit of a mess to be
yeah,
honest.
and you can build a guy with subpar opposition, and just somehow he ends up with a world title, or he's fighting for a world title eliminator shot, and he hasn't fought anyone. He's been fighting bums.
So yeah, you never know. Maybe well, Jake has
Yeah,
said he
like
kind of wants. I think you mentioned he wants to get to 10-0 or something. So maybe by then he'll get
I mean,
it.
he's nowhere near obviously a elite level in boxing, and he had no amateur career. He really has amateurish skills. Only been doing it for 3 or 4 years now, and I mean, yeah, to be fair to him, he's dedicated and he has money, so he's gonna be able to have access to those high level training camps, and he's tough. He has endurance, so we've seen that in his last fight. But is he tough against killers, like real boxers who are
We'll
killers,
have to
not
see.
just MMA fighters who are killers? So, I mean, yeah, that it's a big task. It's way too early to say if he could become a champion, because right now he's fighting MMA fighters and he's fighting Tommy Fury, who's definitely not a world champion
Yeah,
level, if we're gonna be real. So, I mean,
that's why I feel like
who
Tommy's a good
knows?
step up.
Anything's really possible. Anything's really possible at this point. I mean, to see where Jake Paul's already at in 5 fights, fighting Tyron Woodley, a 5-time UFC world champion. Obviously, that's not a boxing world champion, but it is a huge task to ask for in your first couple of boxing matches.
Hmm.
So, I mean, we're gonna see how far Jake Paul can take this. It's a huge stretch to say he can become a
And a
champion,
big thing though
but
going against him is just how late he started at 21, starting to box. Hey, you got guys like Deontay Wilder who started super late and managed to
yeah, and has
reach
the
the
greatest
greatest of
technique ever.
peaks. Yeah, definitely. Hey, so maybe if, Jake's weight class, he has the Deontay Wilder type power. He could just be trash, and maybe he'll hit a few
Yeah,
guys, hit a few
yeah.
not
I
the
mean, I
greatest
mean,
guys in the world,
honestly,
and get the belt.
honestly, the way he knocked out Woodley, it does show that he probably can hurt anyone at that weight class. I mean, it's obviously if he can land a flush shot on them, which is very unlikely. But I mean, if he does, if he actually connects a solid punch, I think he can really hurt anybody in his weight class because he just it just looks like he has that born power to just to hurt a guy. If you saw what he did to Woodley, that was brutal. It was vicious. One of the most brutal knockouts of the year, to be honest. And I mean, to see that coming from Jake Paul, who's a YouTuber, and you expect this guy to really have nothing, but he knocked he out unconscious.
Yeah, but
Yeah, it was definitely brutal. But
anyway, there's no point of even talking about this because Jake Paul's already a world champion, MVP, MVP, most
MVP,
valuable
let's go.
boxer, given to him by the most valuable promotion CEO, aka Jake Paul.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
he's already world
pretty
champion.
much.
So I guess there's nothing
Pretty
left for
much a
him to
champion.
prove.
Anything's possible, I guess, but
He's
obviously
got a
he's not at
long
a world
road,
champion
long
level.
road to go.
Long road, a lot of more years if he actually wants to do it. But to be fair, like you can't doubt him, like,
Every
cause
time
who
everyone
knows? He's
has, he's
still
always proven them wrong.
if yeah, I mean, like if we're 10 years down the line and he's actually still continued and dedicated himself to boxing, you know, who knows where we could be when Jake Paul's 30 years old and he's suddenly fighting for a world title eliminator. It's super stretched to say right now, but at the end of the day, anything's possible. And
Yeah,
I mean, he has access to that high level coaching and championship coaching and championship sparring partners and training, and he can get anyone he really wants. So he could, have all the practice in the world. So it's
yeah.
hard. It's hard
I
to say he
guess
can
only
become a
time
world
will
champion.
tell.
Is
Only
it
time
really
will tell.
possible? I guess we'll find out. So thank you guys so much for watching. It's been a great podcast, and that's pretty much it.
Like and subscribe, and peace.